Welcome to The Writer's Dream, a conversation with authors. Our show is on Facebook. It is on YouTube. You just have to search The Writer's Dream. We have guests who are authors. They're all published authors, and they have a lot of good advice for new writers and for accomplished writers. And we talk about writing books, we talk about publishing books, and we talk about marketing books. So find us on Facebook. If you have a question for us, we'd be happy to answer it. And if you're interested in getting on the show, please go on my website, which you will see coming across the screen now and again. Our guest today is Jeff Markowitz, and Jeff Markowitz is a fellow mystery writer. And his latest book is Death and White Diamonds. And he's also written the Casey O'Malley mystery series. And Who's Killing Doa's Deer? A Case of Murder? No.
A minor case
a
of
minor
murder.
case of murder. I'm trying to read you. I should really go back to my typing, right? And it's beginning to look a lot like Murder, which is takes place around Christmas
Yes,
time.
that's my warm and fuzzy Christmas mystery.
Murder?
People are dying in the shopping mall at Christmas.
Oh, dear.
Santa Claus is a suspect.
Ooh.
I have to tell people, not the real Santa Claus. The guy working in the mall.
Yeah. Sometimes, isn't it funny how when you're a mystery writer, you begin to look at yourself as this person who puts a damper kind of on everything, because we're always talking about murder. So tell me about your new book.
My new book isn't part of the series. It's a standalone. It's a story about a man who may or may not have murdered his girlfriend. He's not sure.
He's not sure?
He's not sure. She's dead.
She's
but
sure.
His memory's a little hazy about the details.
Oh, what was happening there?
Well, the only thing that he knows for sure is that she is dead, and that when the police find the body, he's going to be the prime suspect.
Of course.
So he decides that the smart thing to do is to dispose of the body. And of course, that's when things really start to go wrong. The book is really about what happens as his life spins out of control, as he tries repeatedly and in ever more disgusting ways to dispose of
her body,
the remains of his late girlfriend.
Oh, dear. So you can't tell us, of course, and I don't want you to tell us whether he did it or not.
Well, the interesting thing for me is that it's less for me a whodunit than it is, regardless of whether or not he did it, what happens to his life when he realizes that he may have done it.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting premise. And actually, some of the most exciting stories that I've read are about how a murder changes people's lives and how they react to it.
I'm interested in that notion of what happens when you find a dead body, how the dead body changes the course of events for the people who are still alive.
Yes, who are left.
And who have to, in various ways, come to terms with the fact that someone's died. In the case of Death and White Diamonds, as I say, Richie has to deal with the fact that he may have in fact done it, and he's not sure. It's interesting because he's not a very likable man. And yet my readers tell me that they're rooting for him throughout the book, notwithstanding the fact that on almost every page in the book he's doing something that you shouldn't really like, and yet there's something very appealing about kind of rooting for him in that circumstance.
Yeah, I would imagine I think in terms of all of the people who process a crime scene and medical examiners and how they deal with what they have to see every day. And I actually did ask that question. I had a guest speaker, and I used to teach forensic science, and I had a guest speaker who was a medical examiner, and one of the students challenged him and said, well, you mutilate the body. And I cringed because I thought, oh, yeah, I guess speaker, and this kid saying, and actually his answer was so good because he said, no, I bring closure to the family. I investigate from the standpoint of trying to find out what I can tell the family who is in terrible shock over this death that can possibly bring them some peace or at least some closure.
Yeah. I was actually at a Mystery Writers Conference last month and spent a good bit of time talking with both police officers and CSIs about that issue and about the fact that everyone who deals with those sorts of situations, whether they're police, whether they're investigators, whether they're emergency room technicians, all deal with it to some extent with a really dark sense of humor. They all deal with it by finding something that makes them laugh in an otherwise tragic situation.
Yeah.
And that's really the story that I want to tell. I want my readers laughing as they're reading the book. The book is not a dark book. It is, I think, the funniest book I've written. But it's funny within that gallows humor kind of context.
Well, also, death is part of life.
Yeah.
And we're all going to die, and old people are going to die, and we're going to have to deal probably with not our own deaths because we'll be dead, but certainly with the death of people we care about or some that we don't care about. And, how do you deal with it? And of course, in this book, I'm intrigued because I'm thinking in terms of, you said something that really sparked my interest because you said all the various ways he tries to dispose of the body. And of course, having taught forensic science, we get into all of that grim stuff. And I have to actually do a presentation on Halloween, and it's called the famous forensic cases, blood splatters and such. And I'm thinking of including all of the kinds of things that people in funeral parlors who embalm bodies have to deal with. It should be fun. So, when did this book come out?
Came out in December.
Okay. All right. So you're almost a year into it. Now, your other books, Casey O'Malley.
My other books are
Cassie
a
O'Malley.
traditional amateur sleuth mystery series.
Okay.
My sleuth is a woman in her mid-30s by the name of Cassie O'Malley. She is a widow, and
Already? Did she do it?
No, but she her backstory, she marries her college sweetheart, and almost immediately after college, he dies. When we meet Cassie in the series, it's about 10 years later. She's now been widowed for more than a decade, living alone in a condo on the edge of the New Jersey Pine Barrens. She writes for a barely reputable tabloid magazine, and in the course of covering stories for the tabloid, has this knack that all amateur sleuths seem to have of finding themselves in the middle of the murder investigation. It's a fun series.
That's the fun part of having an amateur sleuth.
Yes.
Is getting them into these situations. That's because that's what I have. Yeah. I have an amateur sleuth.
And
too.
for me, it was also it was fun because I'm writing that series from my female side. My protagonist is female.
How do you do that?
People find it surprising, I think. Sometimes I think they find it more surprising that a man would write a lead female character than that a woman might necessarily choose to write a male lead character. But the truth is, and you know this because you're a writer, I would challenge anyone to show me a book that only has men in it or only has women in it. Exactly. That if you are writing a three-dimensional story about people that you want your readers to see as really fully developed characters, you're always writing both men and women. So I found it an interesting challenge for me. I think it actually made me a better writer when I was first starting, because it made it easier for me to separate me from my sleuth. And actually, I think it taught me more as a writer about how to develop characters. But probably my most gratifying feedback that I get about the series is when readers, and in particular female readers, tell me that they like Cassie and that they find her to be a believable character. And I find that very gratifying, because it's an issue sometimes.
Sure it is, because I find I have, my main character's a female, but she has a boyfriend, and when I bring the boyfriend in, which he's there all the time, I really have to stop and think. I have to stop and think, how would Ty deal with this situation, and how will it be different from Annie? Because you want that contrast. The contrast, vive la différence. You want that contrast because it makes the story better. Because I think, for me, when I first started to write, the characters were people who I was copying, people who I knew, and then eventually you learn that you have to get your head into that character, and the opposite sex is a challenge.
It was an interesting experience for me, but I think part of it, and we do this sometimes as writers and as readers, not just about gender, but about almost any kind of identifying characteristic, and all of a sudden we feel like we have some obligation to make sure that that character represents all women, or all men, or all Italians, or all gay men. And the truth is, they're all individuals. And as long as we remember that we're writing an individual and don't feel some need to try to say, what would a woman do in this situation? It doesn't matter what a woman would do in my series. What would this particular woman do? Same thing in this story. It doesn't matter what people in general would do. I need to know what Richie would do. And for me, what was really fun about this book was getting inside his head, because he's clearly a sociopath. And
giving it away.
I used to say that I didn't want to write a darker story because I didn't want to carry that around inside my head for 6 months or a year, because it's a little disturbing. I never had more fun than carrying Richie around inside my head. It was just delightfully disturbed.
Well, if you can make it delightfully disturbing, yeah. What I'm also interested in when I read other people's mysteries is their use of forensic science. Did you, without giving away how he disposed of the body, did you find that you had to do research?
Yes. This book, much more than in my series, again, because it's an amateur sleuth, doesn't require a lot of police and police procedural and forensic kind of work. In the series, I kind of talk about that in the same way you would talk about things like sex and violence in most traditional mysteries. That stuff happens off camera, happens off stage. So there's probably someone somewhere doing forensics, but I don't need to write it. This book needed forensics, and it was a lot of research. But I also think it's not our job as writers necessarily to get every fact correct. We need to create realistic, believable character scene situations. We need to make sure that we're right about enough of it that it's believable, and that we haven't just ignored obvious fallacies in forensic science.
Right. Do you write in first person or third?
This book, there are sections of this book written in first person, there are sections written in third. I decided, I enjoy writing in third person because I enjoy writing real ensemble kinds of stories with a very large cast of characters. I decided in this book that Richie's part of the story, you needed to hear him tell. So whenever Richie, in any scenes where Richie is in the scene, he is telling you what happened.
It's easier to do humor that way too.
Yes, it is.
Because the humor is coming from him.
Exactly. Because again, I can have him say some really stupid things. I can put him in some situations and let everybody kind of watch how he bumbles along. That body disposal part of the job description, if you will, is really not his strength, obviously. So he can say things in ways that the reader can laugh at.
Yeah. I noticed that on your cover here you have a beach scene,
Yes.
and Cassie also is, she's in the Jersey Pine Barrens.
Yes.
You're in the Long Island Pine Barrens right now.
Yes, I am.
And so you wrote about a setting you know about?
Yeah.
Because you live in Jersey.
I live in New Jersey. I don't live in the Pine Barrens. I live just a little north of the Pine Barrens. People don't realize how large the Pine Barrens are in New Jersey. It is literally almost half the state. And it extends to within about 50 miles of Philadelphia and within about 100 miles of Manhattan. And there are still large tracts in the Pine Barrens that's just undeveloped. Pine forests, cranberry bogs.
Here too.
There are lots of small towns that have appeared and disappeared over the centuries in the Pine Barrens. And I started probably 40 years ago going down to go canoeing in the Pine Barrens, and I've spent a lot of time in that area. So the series is set in South Jersey, in the Pine Barrens, and at the Jersey Shore.
Some place that you know well and you love.
The setting for Death in White Diamonds is a fictional setting. It's not specifically South Jersey, but it's based on the Delaware Bay region of both New Jersey and Delaware. So that if you know, for example, Cape May,